Hello, welcome to the sideboard here at the Star City Games Columbus Invitational. I'm Nick Miller alongside Gerry Thompson. You all know him.
Yo.
You read him. You see him on stream every week. He's playing a Esper, well, blue-white. It's technically got black in it.
Yeah,
but
technically.
Blue-white Thopter Gifts. We could probably add a few more words into the name of this deck here, but
There's a lot going on.
it is a lot to take in. But you played a deck similar to this last week at Baltimore in the Modern Classic, but you're playing it again here at the Invitational. You're 4-0 so far. You got one more section of Modern to come. But how's the deck treating you?
I mean, obviously I'm 4-0, so the deck has been treating me very well, but if I had to do it all over again, I probably would not play the same deck.
All right.
I just think it's really hard to play, and my losses in the Classic came from basically me making mistakes, which should be like a rousing endorsement for the deck, right? But I also just don't want to put that kind of pressure on myself. You know, I want to play something a little bit more forgiving, a little bit more proactive and powerful, and this deck is good, but it is difficult to play.
Okay. What are the huge points of tension in the deck when you have these decisions to make? What's usually coming up?
Like when you're safe to transmute Muddle to Mixture, for example, like basically whenever you're safe to just spend some time drawing cards or like filtering or trying to find your combo pieces. Like the goal of the deck is to set up Thopter Foundry Sword of the Meek, and most decks just can't beat that, but it is tougher than I would have expected. It's just Modern is a very fast format, much faster than the old extended formats where I used to play stuff like this.
Right. All the decks seem to be attacking very quickly, so you need to know exactly when you can kind of hold up the counterspell or when to kind of go in on the combo.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Take us through the gifts packages. You have a couple of them going on in here. You've got, of course, Unburial Rites and Hellish Norn, but you also can set up the Thopter Sword package. Then you have a couple other things floating around in here too.
Yeah, so gifts is a weird one. My favorite thing to do with gifts is make a pile where I already have one of the cards in my hand. So like I did this against a Zoo deck where he's attacking me with a Nicodle and I'm at 5 and I have 5 mana. So I cast gifts, and in the pile I get like Thopter Sword, Path to Exile, which is kind of necessary to kill the Nicodle, and another card that was very good. And he's Dispel to insulate me against a burn spell. This is post board. And he binned the Path and the Dispel, let me just pick up the combo naturally, and then I path into the Coddle. And it's stuff like that where it's like you need to be able to make these piles on the fly, because like you can't afford to think too much, and that's another one of those things where it's just like it takes a long time to resolve something like Gifts Ungiven optimally, you know, and it's really tough. You have so many choices, they have a lot of choices, and it's not just like, what 4 cards do I search for? It's like, if I search for these 4 cards, what is my opponent going to put in the graveyard, and how can I exploit them when doing that, you know? So a lot of creativity there. There is an easy mode where it's like, if you have none of the Thopter Sword pieces, you can get Thopter Foundry, Sword of the Meek, Academy Ruins, and Teleria West, and given enough time, you're going to be able to set up the combo because there's a second Academy Ruins in the deck to transmute for with the Teleria. So that one's pretty easy, and then just getting 2 cards, Unburial Rites and Hellish Norn, they have to put 2 cards in the graveyard, so then you get to untap, flashback Unburial Rites. That generally happens against like Infect and Affinity, but again, they're trying to kill you on turn 3 or whatever. So
if you're getting to the point where you have 5 mana to do that, you're probably in decent shape.
Yeah,
4 or 5
exactly.
mana.
So there are some easy modes. There's a lot of things you can do with Snapcaster Mage. Sometimes you're just in a spot where you just want to like gifts for another gifts, a Thirst, maybe a Seer Visions, just like some raw card advantage.
Okay. So you've played against a bunch of fast decks so far. I assume this is kind of much more situated for the slower, grindier matchups.
I think it is. The deck is really good against things like Jund and Abzan. Abzan was the 4th deck I played against. Otherwise, I played against 3 Goblin Guide matchups. And yeah, I mean, they can have stuff like Abrupt Decay or whatever, but Academy Ruins just kind of beats that.
Right.
So those matchups are generally a lot easier. Like you have a lot more breathing room, time to cast your Thirst for Knowledges against Tarmogoyf and stuff like that. But yeah, I was not expecting a lot of Goblin Guides. I expected more Infect and Affinity, which may have been a mistake. I shaved the Timely Reinforcements out of the sideboard to make room for some other stuff, and it was like, oh man, Timely would have been so good.
Wouldn't mind having a couple extra of those.
Yeah, I also have Gutshot in my sideboard, which is specifically for Infect and Affinity, and if I had Sunlance instead, that would have been a card I could have brought in against those Wild Nicodle decks.
So another card you can think about kind of bringing in.
Yep.
All right, so you've got, card drawing in here. You got the Serum Visions. You have Supreme Verdicts as mass removal. And then you've got these other cards going around here. Detention Sphere, Oblivion Ring, and then Engineered Explosives, kind of like catch-alls.
Yeah, sort of. I mean, I have Academy Ruins in my deck, and last week I didn't have a 3rd color, which was just an oversight. That was just a blatant mistake. So yeah, there's basically no reason to not play Explosives when you have Gifts Ungiven and Academy Ruins in your deck, and it's a reasonable enough card to main deck anyway. But the Banishing Light, Detention Sphere are things that I can put in Gifts piles that are answers to random permanents. Like Liliana of the Veil is one that is pretty tough to deal with, especially since I have basically 0 creatures in my deck. but it also does things like get rid of a Stony Silence post board, which is really nice. So I wanted to kind of insulate myself against that.
All right. Got a little bit of game against, the hexproof decks and kind of some of the oddball stuff that's going to throw other types of permanents
maybe
at you.
I Banishing Light or I Oblivion Ring like an Umbra or something and then get to cast Supreme Verdict.
Right. All right. You got the Talisman here for mana. Muddle the Mixture is a card that just kind of holds a lot of the pieces of this deck together. A counterspell when you need it, but also a tutorable piece for many of the pieces in this deck.
Yeah. So there were two big things that led me down the path of this deck. First, I figured out that Ancestral Vision is just not playable in this type of deck, because when you have Ancestral in your deck, you're spending all this time to try and stay alive and make sure your Ancestral comes off and stuff. And then when it does, it's supposed to translate into a win, because you're jumping through all these hoops to make it happen. So you can't just draw like a bunch of like random artifacts, like drawing on Burial Rites. And I went through this in detail in my article last week. It was like 3,500 words about this deck. So if you haven't read this, you're interested in this deck, by all means go and read that. But yeah, you just can't have all these weird cards, because then it's basically like you didn't draw anything. You just drew a bunch of air. So instead, what I did was play Serum Visions and Thirst for Knowledge, things that let me filter my draws, and that was just way more important for the deck than actually just drawing a hard 3 cards. And then Muddle was the second piece, where it was like, okay, I'll play one Muddle, like I think it's good enough to main deck, and like one will probably have a target against most things. And just as I was playing like more and more games, it was like, okay, like I'm short a piece just like constantly, and Muddle helps fix that. And it's just like, oh, this Muddle is actually like not that bad of a counterspell against most things. Like the green decks have either Collecting Company and Court of Calling, and there are burn decks out there and stuff like that. Like it's not that bad. Very good against Infect. So yeah, I just added more and more Muddles, cut the Ancestrals, played more like just velocity-based card drawing, and that's how we ended up here.
And I imagine you have to be pretty well situated against the Ancestral Vision decks yourself.
So I have 3 Muddles, and I have 2 Spellsnarers to kind of win the counter battle. But yeah, I mean, their Ancestrals themselves are not as effective, just because in game 1 at least, they're probably drawing like Terminates and things that don't necessarily do anything. And I do have a lot of removal, and they are Creature Light. So a lot of the time it does just involve like killing all their stuff. Maybe they have some Kolaghan's commands to break up my combo, but I have Academy Ruins, which they can't touch in game 1. So yeah, those matchups are pretty good.
Yeah. Academy Ruins being just kind of the end-all trump when they just can't get rid of the pieces seems pretty good for late game.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. So sideboard, you have a bunch of more counter spells between Dispel and Negate. You said you only have 1 Timely, but you would like to have more.
If I had to do this tournament again and have the same pairings, yeah, I don't know what the field actually looks like. Maybe I just played against like the 3 Goblin Guide players that were there or whatever, but it is definitely one of the best cards, if not the best card in those matchups.
Elspeth Sun's Champion, this card got a lot of traction when Eldrazi was running wild. Why do you still want it in the deck now?
Well, I think it got traction more as an answer to Tarmogoyf. Just like, it's one of those things that, like you played Standard, right? Like they play Elspeth, it just stabilizes the board immediately, because they just have a bunch of like green ground pounders, and they just can't stop Elspeth. And it's kind of the same thing against John, where it's just like you play it, and they have a Maelstrom Pulse in their deck to deal with it, like straight up. And you just chump block Tarmogoyf all day, or it just comes down, kills all their Tarmogoyfs, and it's just one of the alternate win conditions that you can have that is just kind of like rock solid by itself. It stabilizes the board, it kills them, it's hard to deal with, it's worth the 6 mana price tag, and I do have 2 Talismans in my main deck to kind of accelerate a little bit. And post-board, people are going to be bringing in a bunch of hate, because they're just going to lose almost exclusively to the combo in game 1, and the natural reaction is to just like jam in all your Stony Silences, your Abrupt Decays, like keep all that stuff in, and I just go down on those pieces. And I just bring in stuff like Elspeth or Jace Vryn's Prodigy and just try and like sidestep that.
Right, that's what I was going to bring up next. You've been on the Jace train since it's come out basically in older formats. Looks really good in this deck when you've got a bunch of pieces you can kind of get value off of.
Yeah, I played against a lot of green decks last week, and I had the Snapcaster Mage in the main deck, and it was like pretty tough for me to actually like flash back a Supreme Verdict with that. Like I had the mana to do it, but often I would want to like hold open counterspell mana or whatever, and I was like, like maybe Jace is just good to like, again, sidestep all this stuff, make the game be about something that they didn't know the game was actually about, and it is much easier to flash back the rest against the green deck when you're only paying 4 mana for it.
Right, much easier than 6 mana. So you have a lot of options here to kind of juke and jive and move around what you think your opponent's going to do, which I imagine is exactly where you want to be.
It's a lot of fun.
In Eternal format.
It's a lot of fun.
All right, so you've made some changes. You're off to a great start. You're heading into the a couple last rounds here with Players Championship berth on the line.
Yeah. Try not to think about that. Just one round at a time.
All All right, one round at a time, he says. Good luck the rest of the way.
Thank you.
Gerry,
Appreciate it.
thanks for joining me here in the sideboard. Stay tuned to StarCityGames.com all weekend long for the action here in Columbus.